Now back to the Wisconsin Vegetable Garden Radio Show with your hosts, Joey and Holly Baird.
Holly, we don't have to go to the Ivy Organic Spring and Plant Garden Hotline because our guest is right next to you in the studio.
Yeah, that's exciting. Rayna Andrews is a local author and activist here in Milwaukee. She is focused on solving health disparities by teaching young people about the connection between their health, food, and community. Andrews has authored a new children's book on the subject, which is Alex McGreen and the Tale of the Mysterious Kale. Welcome to the program, Rayna.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, we appreciate you taking time to join us in the studio and to talk about not only what you do to help fight hunger, but also the book in which you've authored.
Mm-hmm. So you consider yourself an activist, and sometimes many people feel that could be a negative title. What does being an activist mean to you?
Well, oftentimes, I think the usual status quo or what's synonymous with activism is people marching in lines, carrying signs, but activism is really taking a stand for social change. And I think what's happening in our food system is a public health concern and deserves true activism.
Well, many people, or you go to a public school, where does corn come from? Aisle 9 at the grocery store. That's the answer in which you get a lot of times. With our niece and nephew, whenever we ask, they're like, can we go to, which they see us grow the product, they see us harvest it, they help us harvest the product. They know where food comes from, unlike many people in our society. So it's very important in order to get the word out, because 20 years ago, we knew where food comes from, or even 30 years ago, but now we've got such a, I don't want to say closed society, but it's very uninformed of where this education needs to be delivered to.
Absolutely. I would say in the last 50 years, really in the last 10 years, we've seen a huge shift with the source of our food. And when I founded the Healthy Food Movement, it wasn't on the notion of getting just healthier and safe food. It's having people know where the source of their food is. Mm-hmm. And when I say healthy food, I mean whole foods. Seeing what a tomato actually looks like, knowing where a pineapple actually comes from. And so what we find more and more is that our food comes in plastic bags and cardboard boxes, and the latest crave is this Impossible Burger, which is still a highly processed product. And so what I try and do is get children and their parents to realize the source of their food, to have a more intimate connection with their food, so that they treat food more as medicine rather than as something really good to eat and to eat all the time and overconsume.
Now you're talking about the overprocessed vegan burger? Is that what you're... And then
yes.
There's a chicken place that has now vegan chicken.
Yes.
Why can we not just eat lettuce and tomatoes? Why do we have to process it down into something that looks like meat if you're anti-meat?
That's exactly it. And so here we are eating vegetables, and we have to mock it up to make it look like meat, yet we dress up meat with all these seasoning and spices to make it more like vegetables.
Yeah.
And so...
Pick a team and stick with it. Let's
exactly.
So why is it so important? I know you touched on that with the knowing where the food is coming from, but why is it so important to you, that connection between the health and food and their community?
I truly believe that food is medicine. There's so much scientific evidence to prove that a lot of our health disparities, from diabetes, hypertension, obesity, all come from the food that we eat. Even mental health. I mean, when you eat a lot of really processed, refined sugar, it messes with your brain, and
this
you
is
can't focus.
Scientifically proven. This is not just something that you've come up. Yeah, yes,
yes, and also the quality of our food. There's been evidence to show that's connected to violence in our community. And so when we can control our food, when we can control our appetite and what goes into our body, which are whole foods, I think we'll have a much greater outcome for our entire community.
Well, if you look at studies, and people can go on the internet, it's a wonderful tool, and go back before World War II, before a lot of the processed foods. There was the diseases in which humans had is totally different, or less of what we currently have now in the last 30 to 40 years. The numbers of this or that has increased, and what also has increased, the amount of processed foods that are in our everyday lives.
Absolutely. In the last 15 years, the number of obese Americans has increased by over 30%. Which is amazing. And when you have people who are obese and overweight, it leads to so many other preventable diseases.
Okay, why is hunger such an important issue?
Why hunger is such an important issue is that in our country, there are over 57 billion tons of food that go to waste each year. And that's alarming, because there are 42 million Americans that don't know where their next meal is going to come from. By the United States Department of Agriculture definition, that would be food insecure, which means they don't know where their next meal is going to come from. They couldn't access their food within the last 12 months, or they couldn't afford the food that they accessed in the last 12 months. Why that's so important is that in the land of abundance, we have so much food that we produce in America, yet we have so many people that go hungry. And that delta, that huge gap, is solvable. We can close that gap. So, for example, in Wisconsin, we have more than 700,000 Wisconsinites that don't know where their next meal is going to come from. However, there's 1.1 billion pounds of food that goes to waste. The greatest culprits are individual consumers like you and I. 33% of our household goods in food products end up going to the landfill. So if we can make a reduction by at least 15%, we can effectively close the meal gap here in Wisconsin.
And you make that very, very clear. We go to the grocery store, we buy our product, we might as well throw 33% right in the trash before we even get in the house, because that's where it ends up. We're just as guilty as the next person, but we see that. And and correct me if I'm wrong, about 1 out of every 4 kids go to bed hungry, or is that a little high, or is that where we're at?
So new evidence has come out to show that it's now 1 in 5.
Okay.
That's still very high, right? That's like one of us in this room would be food insecure. Yes.
And there's a lot, and a lot of things in life revolve around money, and the farmers will make a product, and then, we're not getting a good price, we're going to dump it before it even goes to the shelves, we'll call it a loss, get a tax write-off or whatever they do financially, and then they grow another crop. It doesn't even make it off the farm sometimes, because it doesn't have the value in which the farmer needs in order to get to the grocery store. And the short shelf life of some of these products we see at the farmer's market, because the grocery store cannot handle a 24-hour lifespan. That's it. For example, lemon cucumbers, very, very short shelf life. You only see it at a farmer's market. You don't see it at a grocery store, because it doesn't have the longevity of it. So that's a thing that we all can be better at.
I would like to add to that, like when you say lemon cucumber, there are a lot of foods. That's why I think food literacy is the biggest piece out of the entire food movements that are happening right now, that you have a lot of the food conservationists or the food waste folks. And then you have the food access people. But food literacy on where your food comes from, the source of it, how to prepare it, the medicinal purposes behind it, I think that's missing from the conversation.
Absolutely. That's totally what it is. Now, we have listeners in other stations and across the country and around the world, but we're going to focus this question on Milwaukee, because that's where you're from. What can we do to help people locally in our community and even here in Milwaukee?
What can we do specifically in what space?
In getting the information out, teaching people, and trying to not waste as much as the study shows that we waste on a daily or yearly basis.
I think everybody can have their own healthy food movement by taking on social responsibility. So if you're a single person, or even
use that word, responsibility.
Yes,
that's the important word.
We all have a personal responsibility, and the reason why I say food insecurity is a public health concern is that we often in society, the current narrative is it's them versus us. It's like they need to do something.
It's never us. It's never
right. It's never the collective. But from a public health lens, it has to be all of us taking responsibility to make this shift. So as individuals, either, like I said before, a single person or a family of 4, we have to look at how much food we're consuming. Like if I'm a single person, I don't need a sack of onions or a sack of potatoes. I think there can be a whole movement where community, just as we share cars like Uber or Lyft, we can share kitchens and share groceries, where together as communities we come together and divide up our grocery bill. We can also look at what we're consuming as human beings and pay attention to our bodies so that we're not overeating in that space. We can also look at legislation and become advocates for policy, where right now there's policy out there, or it's not a policy, but there is legislation that it's called, there's a policy on the floor right now that encourages farmers to do additional gleaning, where it's called Harvest for Hope, where it's $250,000 that a food bank or food network would put in, and the state would put in $250,000. So you have a $500,000 coffer that would encourage farmers to glean the excess food rather than burning it or allowing wild animals to graze the excess food. That excess food will then go into the food bank and allow it to be distributed to our food pantries, hot meal programs, and shelters. Initiatives like that is something that we all can advocate for. It's something that we all can get behind, and those are things that we can move forward on our individual basis. One thing that I like to do with my family is to cook in the kitchen with our entire family, because I think the younger you teach children and the more connected they are to the source of their food, the more connected that they'll be and the more they can appreciate where their food comes from.
Makes a lot of sense there whenever we can take steps in our own lives, and then and people, and you said, we don't need a whole bag of onions, and people are like, oh, it's cheaper to buy by the bulk. Well, if it's just going to go to waste, what's the point of saving a nickel per onion when it comes down to it?
Right. I think as Americans, we've become extremely wasteful. Being here in the land of abundance, I think one of our greatest issues is that we have so much. We like to complain about not having enough. That wasting.
I'm never good enough as the next person down the road.
But here's the kicker. But yet we will bring in coupons and want you to double and triple match it, okay?
Exactly. Now, just switching gears here, I want to touch on your book. Your book, Alex McGreen and the Tale of the Mysterious Kale. What is it about, and what was your reasoning for writing it?
So the little voice that you hear in the back of me is my son, Julian. He's now 2. And when I was pregnant, this was around mid-2017, earlier on in the year, when we had the big lead crisis in Milwaukee. We still do. We always have. It just became really public, right? And so what I know about food is when you eat dark leafy vegetables, it helps draw out a lot of the toxins in our bodies from the mercury and the iron and et cetera. And so I was going to community health fairs and bringing a bunch of dark leafy vegetables, peppers, cucumbers, et cetera. And many of our seniors and adults did not want to eat any of the food that I brought. If it wasn't apples, if it wasn't onions, if it wasn't food that they were used to. And so I said, you know what? It's like I'd be better off pouring motor oil down their throat than getting them to eat this healthier food. And so I said, but you know what? I saw that the kids were really interested. And what's this? What's that? Where they pick up the cabbage, they'll start pulling back the leaves, and they look at it more as a discovery, as a science project. And so I wrote the whimsical tale of Alex McGreen, the Tale of the Mysterious Kale, which is about a 10-year-old girl who saves her 5th grade science class with kale, because I saw that if I can get young people interested in where their food comes from and growing their own food and having a connection with their food, that they would then consume it. And I was right. And so I've spoken in front of thousands of young people, from school assemblies to libraries to Boys and Girls Club to food pantries and hot meal programs. And when I read this book, I always try and do a cooking demonstration, either making kale cookies, kale chips, kale smoothies, and they go kale crazy because I give them the recipe and I supervise as they actually cut the kale, as they tear the kale, as they dig into the coconut, as they slice open the mango. And we do an exercise on where does your food come from? So they have to raise their hands up to tell me if it grows in the tree, squat down if it grows in the bush, and touch the ground if it's a root vegetable. And so I think it's a great exercise, and I even have the adults in the room do it, and it's amazing to see how many adults don't know where pineapples come from.
People think they come from trees, but they actually come from a bush, kind of like a zucchini.
Yes.
Now, whenever you do this, do you find that the kids begin to want to eat that, and then they change the outlook for the parents, and the parents start adapting to what the dietary requirements or the wants of that child are?
Yes, amazingly, the children in the homes become the peer advocates. And so many children have never tried kale. I mean, plenty of adults haven't, right? And so when we peel the kale off the rib of the piece of kale, the children will eat it reluctantly, and I think it's a new cool thing, like, this is good. I said, well, what does it taste like? Grass. I'm like, do you like eating grass? Now I do. And they say, ooh, I even like it better. I even like it better in this smoothie. I said, do you like pineapples? Yeah. Do you like mangoes? Yeah. Do you like coconut? Yeah. And so I have recipe cards, and I'll share it with you if you want to share it with your viewers. But they take it home and ask their parents to bring these, to make these, to buy these ingredients and to make the smoothies at home. And so I look at young people being ambassadors in their own home.
That's impressive, and we've seen this from other people in the gardening world, where they teach the kids and the kids teach the parents, and then that's how that snowball gets larger and larger as the whole family and then the community gets involved because of one kid pushing the narrative. Here's what we need to do, because one, it's healthy, and two, realistically, it'll keep you alive longer when it comes to it. Where can we find more about you? Where can we find your book at? Where can we go?
So you can find my book at thehealthyfoodmovement.com, just HEALTHY, foodmovement.com. You can also find me on Amazon. Follow me on Healthy Food Movement on Instagram, Facebook, and it's just Health Food Movement on Twitter.
There you go. Well, we greatly appreciate you taking time and joining us, not only on the program, but in studio, and sharing stories about food and the food that we need to stop wasting and eating healthy.
Yes, thank you.
For more information, please visit thewisconsinvegetablegardener.com.